Hello, everyone. I'm Kyler Cheatham, your host today. I'm honored to be with you on this beautiful Friday morning from Western Colorado. I hope you're having a great morning, evening, afternoon, Saturday morning, wherever you're joining us from today. This is the Confluential Live. We do this every single Friday, and I'll let Adam introduce himself here in just a second before I go through some logistics of the stream. If it's your first time here, welcome. I'm so excited that you're here. Your feedback is just as important as ours. So I invite you to join the conversation in the comments or wherever you're joining from today. We're live on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn. If you're from my TikTok lives on Tuesdays and Thursdays, welcome. Thank you for crossing over into the boring platform. No offense, LinkedIn. Okay. But we're happy to have you here. Today, we are talking about what does it actually look like when you need to replace your legacy technology? And a lot of times we see this as one of the most confusing areas when it comes to what our clients are going through, especially with not only the options in the marketplace, the overall confusion around new technology and the need to stay competitive, as well as, just the overwhelming push from the software vendor and enterprise tech community to be on, a certain system. So we're going to kind of talk through that today and how you navigate that. But before we do that, I'd love to hear where everyone's kind of joining us from, or where you're at in your kind of legacy tech journey. So if you could just drop that in the comments to help us test it. We are implementation experts, so we love to test. So with that, Adam, welcome this morning. Happy Friday. How are you doing? Can you give us a quick intro for those that don't know you?
Yeah. Good morning. My name is Adam Cheatham. I'm the CEO of the Confluential. Have a background in all kinds of enterprise technology deployments. I like this question today because generally, we run into a lot of folks who make the assumption that it's time to replace their legacy systems for one reason or another, and that's not always necessary, right? Now, to be fair, sometimes it's we're going to replace this because that's a part of our overall strategy to upgrade our technology here, and that's fine. But some organizations think that they need to do something different than they are just because it's not working the way that they want it to.
Mhm.
And there's a little bit of throwing the baby out with the bathwater in that kind of conversation when you think about it, because it's kind of a why would you want to go through an ERP implementation if you don't have to, right? It's that type of conversation I'm hoping we can touch on today. And then at the end of the day, some of the, we talk a good bit about things that people do overall as a business that are going to be problems either way, right? You can't fix some problems with technology. And
Mhm.
so what we'll talk about today is a little bit of the types of challenges that you go through when you're trying to fix technology, and what types of problems you need to really fix.
Absolutely. And I think like as your assistant in the background freaks out a little bit, and we go through this conversation, um, we we let's pick up on that kind of thread of do we actually need this, and kind of start with the
Yeah.
psychology behind it. Our system is old. Everyone is moving to the cloud. We need AI. The vendor says our platform is at end of life or they're sunsetting our platform. Um, what what actually is the problem in those statements? Because it's not old technology,
Yeah.
right? A lot of times there's a process issue, and this is why like our approach has to be so diagnostic, right? Because
Yeah.
you really don't know. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, that's like four different questions with four separate answers, but I'll try to cover them all together. So there is we need to replace our software because we need to use AI. And we need to replace our software because we need to modernize this, that, and the other. And some of those things are strategically important from a perspective of we're going to make this change and we're just going to bite the bullet on that. But I think that what you have to continue to do either way is ask, how do we make sure the technology is going to solve the problems that we're seeking to solve? And that's whether or not you ought to replace your system doesn't really matter if you are misguided in your direction on it. So if we're
Mhm.
going to use AI just for the sake of AI, this is something
Mhm.
that we love to pick on at the Confluential. We're going to use AI for what? Well, it's a part of our strategy. Okay,
Cool. That's a sentence.
where?
Strategy.
Cool.
Yeah.
Let's use AI. Let's put all of our data into Chat GPT and see what it says. All right, now all of your information is on the internet, right?
Cool.
Now, of course, Chat GPT says it's not going to directly share all that, but they're still going to use that information to train models. And if you buy a subscription, maybe they won't do it quite that directly. But at the end of the day, you have to have a strategy that works and fits. I think the other piece of it is really that um, when you think about technology and upgrading, why isn't your system working today? Not what doesn't it do,
Mhm.
right? Why isn't it working?
Mhm.
And in some cases, I mean, we're working with one client right now whose answer is it is working. It's working exactly how we want it to. The business is like, this is good. We have exactly what we want. Don't touch it. Leave it alone.
Mhm.
And IT is like, right. But if our server crashes, uh, you'll never have an ERP again. So,
Yep.
okay, fine. And this is where you get to the vendor says we're sunsetting support.
Mhm.
We'll no longer support the system. It's old, it's aging, yada, yada, yada. And in that scenario, the old and aging support and those types of things, there's a conversation on that becomes how risk oriented are you?
Yeah. What's your tolerance for
I
sure?
mean, Oracle has been talking about discontinuing support for JD Edwards for 20 years.
20 years at this point? 20 years.
Something stupid like that, right? Has it happened yet? No, right? SAP pushed a lot to say we're going to discontinue support for ECC6, so you have until 2025 to migrate to S4 HANA.
Mhm.
Had a lot of people bit hard on that
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Freaked out.
and transitioned to S4 HANA, but there are still a large number of organizations out there that are on ECC6 and don't care.
Mhm. Nor
And
should
so
they, really,
yeah,
to be totally
and
honest.
so SAP goes, I tell you what, I'll throw you a bone. We'll give you something else to buy instead that will
Yeah.
move you along your way towards transitioning to ECC6. And I don't bring that up as a comment to distract from the case, but to make it that all of these threats to discontinue software infers some sense of doomsday scenario that
Mhm.
it's not in human nature to assume that something will work out. When
Mhm.
when the doomsday scenario comes up, it's kind of a everything will fall apart and there will be no options. But
Absolutely.
when it comes to software support and somebody being willing to accept money to help, uh, there will always be options,
Yeah.
right?
Don't worry. Yeah,
There are
that's yeah.
people on, and my favorite example is still there are people on AS400 platforms, and IBM was like, we are discontinuing support for this ages ago. But you know what happened? An entire industry popped up around supporting AS400 systems, and now that still happens today. So I think that this conversation of um, the doomsday side of it, they're discontinuing our support. Right? They will still take your money.
Oh, for sure, like, fake
Somebody.
urgency, and that's the line they walk, right? A lot of times, like, they don't want you to give it up, but they come in and that's kind of if you've watched some of my videos, that's the three-pronged approach that they do. Create the urgency, right? Charge you more for the system you already have for maintenance fees. This is an older legacy technology. We need to, we can't ensure that you're going to be compliant or secure. So now our product is your problem, right? And then they come in with this um, savior option. They rescue you with their own product, and all of that is completely made up. But before we kind of get into the SaaS mafia type of conversation, I want to take it into more of like a real cost comparison. And
Mhm.
looking at like the difference between the two, and then stick with us. We'll get into like what you can do as far as decoding what your vendor's saying, and a lot of our own advocacy work is something that, you know, we're able to do. So I think this is a good question to kind of start with that we have on LinkedIn. What's the most common reason companies hold on to their legacy systems longer than they should? So kind of taking it in a different avenue of when are you, when is it too much and you have, you know, critical risk in there?
Well, I think it's when a software system is preventing you from achieving your strategic objectives, you are holding on, you are missing something. We'll say that. I like to be very particular and not say like you held on too long or you know your system's not going to work because I have seen too many scenarios
Yeah.
where the software system doesn't matter.
Yeah.
How many implementation assessments have I done where they say, did we pick the wrong software? And for starters, the answer is that doesn't matter anymore. You're going to be paying for it for the next 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But when you really dig into it and do a deep dive comparison, it's the software that you picked isn't all that bad. Your legacy environment isn't all that bad.
Mm-hmm.
But when we start thinking about when it's time to get off of any software platform or add or change, maybe that's the better way of thinking
Yeah.
about it from the
Good point.
perspective of changing or adding another software package. You are unable to achieve something that you need to be able to achieve to grow as a business, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
going to add an entirely different line of business. Vertical integrations, for example, when you have a great example is a distribution company that all of a sudden says, you know what? We're going to run our own fleets of trucks. Let's do that. Let's just run it. Why? Let's save all of this money on shipping, buy the trucks, and we'll own the assets, and we'll be able to run things ourselves. And somebody says, well, our system doesn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well then let's find one that does, right?
Yeah.
And maybe it's ERP, maybe it's a TMS, right?
Yeah.
So transportation management system or fleet management system or some combination of the two.
Uh-huh.
But that's a good scenario for we need something different than we have today.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. And when we look at kind of breaking down that decision when it comes to unemotional decision making
mhm,
and looking at cost, hardware versus infrastructure, maintenance costs, IT, internal IT support,
mhm.
upgrading, those types of different things. Do you always see SaaS being cheaper than an on-premise solution, like we see in kind of the marketing materials of this is going to save you money?
No. So I I'm a firm believer that in the vast majority of cases, software is not going to save you money.
Mhm,
Um, like that's like saying buying a new baseball bat is going to get you more hits,
mhm.
and is going to get you more home runs. It's not the baseball bat that's going to do that,
Yeah.
unless you're the Yankees and you invent a new one. Uh, but it's not the bat that does that. The bat is an expense that is used for a purpose, and and it has to be an enabler. So your software system is not going to save you money. How you use it might, right? So that's a key differentiator in that. And at the end of the day, what I think is important to realize is that the legacy on-prem system that you have, 9 times out of 10, maintaining it for the next 5 years will be less expensive than implementing a new SaaS-based software system. There's a high likelihood of that. And
Mhm.
software vendors know this, right? So this is
Yeah.
this part of the conversation. To kind of give you some rough math, you've already bought those licenses, right? Those
Yeah.
licenses belong to you, and you're paying somewhere around 18 to 20% maintenance of those fees for support, or you're hiring another third party or whatever. So you're
Mhm.
you're paying some lower amount for maintenance. The licenses is already bought or already bought. From a SaaS perspective, you pay for those licenses annually, right?
Mhm.
So you have that license fee that comes up. It's a recurring cost, and
Mhm.
so even if that first year is less than the first year of licenses you bought way back when, it runs that same cost every year, and it will go up every year, right? So um, generally, for those of you who are trying to think about whether or not this is going to be cost competitive,
Mhm.
a cost competitive option, you can assume that from an ERP perspective, you will pay somewhere around $225 a month per user per month. And that'll be a good guesstimate for your licensing costs. Um, from there, you'll also pay about twice that for your implementation. And software vendors like to come in and say that the implementation is about the same price as a year's worth of licenses. They like that 1-to-1 ratio, makes it seem smaller. But at the end of the day, on average, those are all guesstimates and sales numbers.
Yeah.
Those things are, and when you start adding all the things that aren't included, you're going to pay about twice your licensing fees for an implementation. So I think those are big numbers, right? So
Mhm.
this we're talking about, if you got 200 users ish, you're talking about 500 grand a year at least in licenses.
Mhm.
And then you're talking about $1 million for an implementation. So over the next 7 years, you're going to spend at least three and a half. You're going to give at least $3.5 million to your vendors,
Yeah.
and that doesn't include the internal costs, the people that you're going to take and move into it, the project management help that you should be getting
Mhm.
from experts that do it every day to make sure that it's getting done right. And that's a lot of money, right? So you start stacking
Yes.
it up. And what I think
Absolutely.
is important to come back to is, why are we going to do this thing and spend all this money? And it needs to have a purpose. That's
Yeah.
the my biggest thing on it. And I think that the challenge that we're seeing a lot and that we're having a great time helping people with
Mhm.
is, I'm doing a poor job of running my IT department,
Yeah.
and so I need a new ERP.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah,
I think
that's the
yeah.
stupidest thing I've ever heard.
I think, it's hard. I mean, the modern IT department looks much different than it did 20 years ago. And I think that's something that isn't really talked about enough, right? Of what that structure needs to look like, and becoming more of a part of the business, a partner to the business. You're at service of the business, of course, but not just like kind of the basement computer fixers anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big transition. But that was if you can't tell, I'm like scribbling notes. An amazing way to kind of look at the different options here, because a lot of times that's what a vendor is going to come in hard with, is like, hey, this is going to actually save you money in the long run. And you just have to remember that, SaaS in general is renting or using somebody else's computer, right? So you're leasing the car in that type of situation, which is not a bad thing, right? You just have to know that it's not magic, right? And that your workload is on somebody else's infrastructure. And those are all important considerations when you come to picking the best option for you. That's really what we're talking about in this conversation. So let's turn to some of these questions here, because I think there's some good ones here in the comments. Let's see. How much is the cost difference between infrastructure versus people versus operational complexity? That could be its own entire conversation in general. But when we look, maybe just give us an understanding of things that you should be considering when the vendor says like it's 1-to-1, and you're like, well, maybe for just the technical piece of it, right?
Yeah.
But we've got a lot of other costs.
So, I think the way to think about this question, and we start thinking about cost from an infrastructure, people, and operational complexity perspective. Your operational complexity is what should drive your decision making, right? highly complex organizations need more technology to run their business. It's just that way. Because they have more things in every space. Now, does that mean that your legacy system can or can't handle that? That's irrelevant to the thought. Technology needs to be more complex to match that complexity. That's a big key part of it. So the challenge in that side of it from an operations perspective is I have this aging infrastructure, so this aging system on an aging infrastructure,
Mhm.
and I'm struggling to keep up with the level of complexity in it. That's fine. That's fine to say that, but that doesn't mean that changing to a new system is automatically going to be able to handle
Yeah.
that complexity,
Mhm.
right? There are some things that are unique to certain organizations that I think are worth saying. Maybe your legacy system handles that better. I mean, was previously talked to a client that was implementing a large software package across a number of different um, mills. And after 5 years of attempting, they decided to put the old software back in because they couldn't
Yeah.
get the new one to do it. Right. So you've solved the idea that you're going to find a better solution to a problem that you've already solved
Mhm.
is a gamble by itself. So the operational complexity from a cost perspective can be quite high. In that the more complex you are, the more investment that you're leaving behind in what you've already built, and the more risk you're taking on that maybe it doesn't work, or maybe it forces you to change something that's an integral piece of how the whole was created. To kind of walk this backwards, and the people side
Yeah.
of it ends up being um, how many people do we need to do this? Which is kind of the how big of a job are we talking about? For the number of ERP systems I've replaced in the years, I am a firm proponent of you should be thinking about what you can do with what you've got. And if you can do better with what you've got, that will cost you fewer people because your improvements can be targeted. But at the same time, if the prerogative is to replace something wholesale,
Mhm.
the bigger the system, the more people it's going to take on your side to do it. And that internal cost is going to come in the space of either one of three things: the people that you rely on the most, just working more hours,
Yeah.
and you run the risk of burnout. The people that you rely on the most being removed from their daily job, and then you run the risk of the business suffering because they're dedicated to building a system, or backfilling the project team with folks that aren't experts so that the people that you rely on the most can continue to run the business, and then you end up potentially building a tool that the people who need it the most say is wrong. So there's
Yeah.
a whole lot of things invested in that people side of things from a cost perspective that you got to figure out. It's hard to
Yeah,
do.
absolutely. And that's one of, the biggest issue on the people side because it's so unique to each organization, right? That's
Mhm.
why we see a lot of people come in and try and outsource, right? And then they get a little bit in trouble,
Yeah.
right? I just talked to a business this week that, was outsourcing a lot of their operations. And it was time for them to kind of pull it back in because they were seeing the cracks in the quality around that because it's not their business, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a huge consideration that you need to do as a disciplined business. Sure, can you have help on that? Right. But not people that are going to want to bill you and outsource that just in general. We've got to figure out what that looks like from, again, that diagnostic perspective for your organization, not, what your industry is doing, what, your mom did in their implementation. Like none of that makes any sense to look at from just an overall project framing standpoint,
Yeah.
which I think are is a good way to kind of spend our next talking about kind of the vendor playbook. And again, I break it up into like three kind of parts. As I talked about the starve, the increase, maintenance fees, and then the rescue. Um, So I want you to kind of like, if we take a step back and talk about like from an economic perspective of why this happens in the marketplace, because I think that's something that
Mhm.
a lot of people don't understand, right? Especially with their incumbent vendors, because this is supposed to be a partner for me in the business. Why would they, why would they push me on something that doesn't make sense for my business from an economic standpoint? And I think, just to add into that, we have a lot of like the AI enabled. I know when we talked about this yesterday on TikTok, we got a lot of questions from people talking about specifically AI enabled ERP systems and
Mhm.
how that's becoming something that now people want them to replace their, overall core operating system with a new AI enabled type of strategy. So why is that happening before we get into the what?
Well, I think that there's a number of reasons for that, right? There's the first of all, if it didn't, if these things didn't add value, they wouldn't be something that people bought, right? So
Mhm,
from a perspective of new software, these SaaS-based systems, they're adding value, right? That's I think that there's a habit of saying because they make money, they're bad. Because it costs a lot of money, they're taking advantage of you. And I think at the end of the day, there are folks out there that will take advantage of the situation, but I think that there is a value that these software packages bring to the table, and that value needs to match with your need, right?
mhm,
Salesforce is like the more or less the original SaaS-based software, right? And they've been quite successful, and a lot of organizations have been humongously successful using Salesforce. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a matter of making sure that things fit. So when you go down that path, and then you start talking about AI enablement, and I think that the challenge with that is you start to think more as a monolithic approach as opposed to the best of breed
mhm,
type of thing. And when you think about AI enabled ERP, every new ERP has an AI enabled something at this point. That the days that you could find one that doesn't are gone. What that actually means, who knows, right? How are you going to use it, right? It's AI enabled doesn't mean anything if you're not going to use it for those enablements. The flip side of it is that your legacy ERP or your legacy software system can be AI enabled too, right? You just have to plug it in. You are taking a more of a best of breed approach. You got to figure out what applications you got to sync up. You got to figure out what workflows you're going to build. Those types of things. That's not a bad answer, right? Just because it doesn't come out of the box with your ERP or your CRM or your whatever doesn't mean that you can't have an AI enabled something. It just means that you got to think about it a little bit harder, which is where vendors come in and say, don't worry about that. We'll take care of that for you. We've done all the thinking.
mhm.
And in a lot of cases, that's not a bad thing.
Yes, absolutely.
It's the don't worry about security. We've got it under control. Well, you should always worry about security no matter what, right? Because there are certain things that your vendor can help with and certain things that your vendor cannot.
Mhm,
Phishing scams are not going to do you any good
mhm.
to prevent them to trust your vendor to prevent your employee clicking a bad link, right?
Yeah.
You can't prevent that, but from a perspective of back-end security, backdoors, and those types of things, your software vendor can do that. And then the idea that their key competency is technology and security,
Mhm,
applying that key competency across thousands of clients, and you become the beneficiary of that. There's a lot of value in that.
mhm,
Same can be said for AI, right? If you have if you can take advantage of the things that they're going to bring to the table as a part of the things that they're bringing to everybody, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? Then maybe that's the path for you. But that doesn't mean that you have to buy a whole brand new ERP or whatever software system just to get AI.
mhm, mhm. Absolutely. And I think it's important to define like what is AI, at an enterprise level, like what does that
Mhm.
actually mean? Because likely whatever legacy system you have now still has many opportunities for AI as well. So if that's where we are and we're an AI obsessed organization, I think there's something to be said for a legacy core. And I always get these questions of like what we should have defined, like what a legacy system is, and just like jumped
Mhm.
right in. So thank you, Dennis, for stopping us and asking the question. In 2026, for a large organization, what would a legacy system be?
I think the definition of a legacy system is just whatever it is you've been
Yeah.
using, right?
Mhm.
It's maybe you implemented it last year and it is now your brand new legacy system. Maybe you've been using it for 20 years. At least this is how I've always thought about it. When I think and talk about legacy systems, I talk about the systems that you've been using.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
a legacy doesn't have to be long standing to be a legacy. It just has to be something that's in place.
Yeah, definitely. But great question. And then what value should you get from AI? And I'll actually add something onto this from some of our audience over on TikTok. Like contractually, when you buy AI from a vendor, what sort of like outcomes or what are we looking for to be able to make sure that we're getting what we get and defining that within our own strategies?
Well, I mean, that's a bit of a nebulous question. What value should you get from any single thing, right? Well,
Mhm,
that's defined by you, and it should
mhm.
be what influences your choice on AI, right? The value that an organization should get from AI is some type of an enablement of to achieve a strategic objective of some sort, right? That's the value that should come with it. It's not a direct answer because I don't know what your needs are. I don't know where your pain points are. I don't know where your biggest opportunities for improvement are. But when you set out to engage AI, you have to say out loud, I am doing it to achieve these things. And that's the key important part.
Awesome. Yeah, great answer for sure. Okay, let's go into the steps here, right? So, first, a lot of times the vendors starve the legacy system, and we start to hear like slow innovation, reduced support, moving certain resources away, limited compatibility with tool, and the
Yeah.
product starts to feel outdated. And I
Mhm.
think about the one that everybody loves when you talk about, which is Great Plains, Microsoft Great Plains. Um, and I think we start to see these as the first steps of like the vendors kind of pulling away from this system. So tell us a little bit about this phase in the overall understanding of like what might be happening with your legacy tech.
Well, I think that it has nothing to do with what's happening in your legacy tech. To be frank, your legacy tech might be working fine. They're not
Mhm.
sunsetting support because of your system. They're sunsetting support because they don't want to pay for it anymore, right? So the department that was running your old system is no longer worth the money to maintain. That's what they're saying. From a business perspective, and I take a far more direct approach into this. Like, let's assume that this decision makes sense for the software vendor, not that they have these ill intentions, um, which is fine. I mean, be the cynic. Be cynical if you like, but from my perspective, it's look. We've been supporting this software system for a long, long time, and we are not going to do that anymore because we are spending more money on it than we're getting out of it. And so it's time to make a change. Industries do this, all kinds of
Mhm.
industries do this, right?
Oh, for sure.
The
Yeah.
car industry is probably the greatest example. Every, 5 to 7 years, your favorite car goes through some type of a model upgrade, right? And they change everything. There's a reason a Honda Civic looks different every 5 years or so, right? They remodel it, they refresh the branding of it and all that stuff. It just is that way. And that's just how the industry works. It's how they stay on the front end of what people are looking for from a perspective of newness. So, this concept that they're sunsetting support has nothing to do with how well your system works. It has more to do with their internal operations and how long they want to support this going forwards. They say, we are going to be putting out the next new version of ERPX. And so, in order to divert our resources to that cause, we're going to take them away from this one and we're going to go build a new one.
Mhm.
So, in 5 years, you're no longer going to be supported on this system. We'd love to transition you to the new one. That's how that goes. So, from a
Mhm.
perspective of the creating the doomsday scenario, it's a normal function of a software business to retire their software, just like it's a normal function of any business to obsolete a product.
Yep. Okay. So we get into that conversation and then talk about the next step when we come into kind of the maintenance of this type of thing. What companies need to consider with your very objective approach.
So, from a maintenance perspective, you got to answer the question of what are my options, right? Start asking if there are other folks that are going to support this, or if the vendor is your last bastion of support, and then you can ask how much can I do for this, right?
Mhm.
A lot of organizations say that I'm beholden to this vendor because they have this one ERP, and that's all. Nobody else is going to support it because it's a little bit more niche, and that's fine. So then you say, all right, how do I support it? They'll still take my maintenance fees. It's not like they're gonna say we'll stop taking your money. It's just that we're not going to provide security patches and those types of things. So what can I do on my side to extend the useful life of this system? Because it works just fine, right? You can have your own security protocols. You can have your own upgrades, and a lot of those software systems you can write your own customizations into as
Mhm.
well, right? That's the way those things used to work. Not today, but that's the upgrade path that software systems are getting onto. I am curious. It's kind of a side note. What happens to these organizations when they only have one software version to maintain and they
Mhm.
don't have to change? And the only thing that they'll have as an option is to increase their prices just for the sake of increasing their prices, and that's a weird
Mhm.
spot to be in. So I'm just kind of thinking about that scenario out loud. But to come back to the question, what can I do with it? And I
Mhm.
think that if I were to encourage folks here on the line to take one most important thing away from this conversation, it's that you need to do your job, whether or not you have an old system or a brand stinking new one. You've got to do your job too, right? So a lot of organizations, for example, that I've worked with, they're replacing their legacy system because their IT department cannot support the needs of the business.
Mhm.
Is it the IT department that can't support the needs of the business or the
Yeah.
software system? It sounds to me like you
Yeah.
just told me you have a people problem,
Yeah.
right? So let's solve that. And then you start saying things like, so how do you intake requests? How do you build to business requests? Like, well, we get them an email all the time, and it's like, how are they organized? Like, well, we don't do that. We just do it we work on them one at a time. Like, maybe if you organize things and stopped worrying about the little stuff and started focusing on the bigger
Mhm.
ones, you'd have a better chance at maintaining your system more effectively and get more life out of it. And let me tell you, that problem's not going to go away with a new system. It's just going to come up again after you go live. So I've worked with companies that need that IT structure
Mhm.
for maintaining delivery management. I worked with companies that they finish an ERP and they said, "Now what do we do with this thing?" You're
Yeah.
like, "Do you have a delivery management practice?"
Yeah.
No. Like, well, that's what you do with it. You got to
Yeah.
figure out how you run your whole ecosystem, right? How does IT work for you? What is their organizational structure? What is their operational system? And I don't mean like Linux, right? I mean like how are you operating? What are your processes for taking in requests from the business and resolving them, and then testing them, and then deploying them, right? So I
Mhm.
guess the deployment's where the resolution comes in, but what does that look like? Do you know
Mhm.
what DevOps is? Because a lot of folks go, who, what? DevOps? Like, you build, you test, you deploy. right? That's a key component of this conversation. Are you doing that? No, we're just kind of building stuff and we're deploying it. Like, well, no wonder, right? So there's a maturity in this that
Yeah.
isn't going to get better with the new software system.
Mhm.
The same
For sure.
way, if you implement your new your old broken business processes in a new system, that's not going to fix your processes. Anyway.
For sure. Yeah, I think that those are all really important considerations, like before you go and talk to the vendor. And this is where a lot of businesses get stuck because they don't know what they don't know, right? And so a lot of times it comes down to buying a new software and having that experience of seeing kind of the misfit between what
Mhm.
you thought you were going to get and what you actually got, and you realize like, wow, this is actually an internal problem. It has very little to do with our external software. And unfortunately, that's a lesson that a lot of businesses have to learn the hard way, which is why we offer these conversations, completely free of charge, because we want you to be able to experience that and hear it not just from us, right? It doesn't really matter what we say. It matters what's best for your business. Just like it didn't really matter what software you bought the software, right? Now it comes to how do you make sure that you're a disciplined, healthy business to be able to support the business systems in which you're running. And that's one of the biggest things that we see when people are misinvesting, I guess, their capital in the wrong spot, which a lot of times could be reinvested in a more IT maturity project or a modernization project, as
Mhm.
opposed to a brand new sparkly system that some vendor sold your board. Like this is going to be the end all be all for your organization.
Yeah. And again, there are things with technology that make things better, that make things faster, and this, that, and the other. Just like over the years, engines in cars have improved, and they've made it cars faster. We've made cars safer, and all of these great and wonderful things. Faster does you no good if you don't know how to drive a car, right? Faster gets you in trouble faster if you don't know how to drive, right? So that's we just had to remember that it's not this silver bullet software, AI, ERP, whatever you want to call it, it's going to fix the problem. It's not. The work
Absolutely.
that you put into fixing the problem itself is what's going to fix the problem. The technology may help.
Okay, so let's go into the kind of this urgency conversation. You laid it
Mhm.
out for us. You're like, this is kind of what happens when this goes on. What do you tell businesses to say during those conversations, whether we're sunsetting or even whether like your executive team has decided like we need to be an AI first organization? What do you as the IT director need to kind of be able to say in these conversations to a vendor or an executive team to know that we need to make the best decision for our organization?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, cool. Why? Not from a perspective of challenging the prerogative and the mandate, but I need to know why so I can figure out how to do it right. You can use AI for a lot of things. And if you say I need to use AI and the CEO's thought process is it's going to optimize our supply chain, and I plug in generative AI so that it helps with my IT tickets, then I missed the mark, didn't
Yeah.
I?
Yeah.
Right. So the understanding why and why are we doing this? What's the goal? What are our objectives? Will always be the most important question.
So what if, right? It's well, we need AI. Our board is pushing for AI. Like we kind of talked about at the beginning of this discussion, that technology obsession, right?
Mhm.
Um, so what if that's the why? How do you kind of peel that back and really trying to
Yeah.
understand what they mean?
Well, you can certainly dig into it. What are our operational goals, right? This is where I start a lot of conversations with organizations. So then what are your organizational goals on the whole,
Hmm.
right? And how do you expect to achieve them? We're going to double in 5 years. We're going to add locations. We're going to acquire businesses. We're going to add new product lines. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Okay, that helps. how do you expect technology to influence that? Well, technology is not going to do me any good from an acquisitions perspective until I get the acquisition brought in, and then I got to bring people onto it. Okay, so I got to have something that's scalable. Do we know what types of businesses we are planning to acquire? Similar, totally different? Are we vertically integrating through acquisition? What does that look like? Well, we'll go back to the fleet management thought. We're
Mhm.
going to buy a trucking company that runs these things. So, and all right, now I know where technology needs to fit in this. Actually, we don't have any technology that fits into that, so I've got to figure that piece out and how to bring them in. The flip side of it is um, we're going to add warehouses. We're going to expand on what we actually already do. Okay, I need something that can handle what we do today more efficiently, more effectively from a scalability perspective. Now I know what at least the direction to head into. And then
Yeah.
the most prudent thing to do after that is to sit and say, all right, we've done an analysis.
Mhm.
Here is what we think we can do with technology based on what you guys
Mhm.
told us to do after. We can use this software to fix this. We can use AI to fix that problem. We can use
Yeah.
AI to fix that problem. Is that what you're
Absolutely.
looking for? Before we get in, is that what you're looking for? Right. So
And
I'm
I
going to
think
pause over.
that has to be on many layers of the organization, right? Like a lot of people, I think, want to skip that step because they just want to get to the solution piece of it. Kind of to whether it's to appease the power that be, anything else in those conversations. But we have to be able to put in that discipline work. And I think that's the real contradiction we see now in the industry is that enterprise tech and specifically SaaS, like especially as we've seen, stocks fall and AI stocks rise, right? Just the understanding of like kind of what's happening in the market. Then we get this misunderstanding that we can do these things fast or that we need to be able to look at a new system and implement it quickly,
Mhm.
when really that's quite literally the opposite of what you want to do in this. You want to be able to understand your investment, even if you're not talking about like a core enterprise system, but you want to be able to do that with intention of like understanding your processes and the rest of that, and really evaluating those pieces before you go into that, because it's not really a question of like should you keep your legacy tech or should you not. It's more of like what's best for your business, right? It
Mhm.
doesn't matter how old the legacy tech is, right? It matters what you want to achieve with this, whether your vendor wants you to sunset it, or you need to be able to, like you mentioned, well, if the server crashes, you won't have an ERP system, and those different understandings, but those are unique to each business. That can't be templated, or that can't be addressed by an outside organization and handled in that way.
Right. Well, I don't know. I go back to the practicality of it, right? Let's figure out what it is we're trying to accomplish, and then figure out whether or not our solution fits that goal, right? So, a lot of things you can do with just the people that you already have. A lot of things you can do with the system that you already have. And frankly, I think that there is a revolution coming in legacy technology, which is I can plug any AI to this
Yes.
conversation. And I
Yeah.
think that that's where SaaS companies are going to start to suffer the most. Is the folks that didn't convert are going to be to SaaS based software are going to be plugging in AI to hold up their existing on premise solutions, and they're going to be better off for it. And I think
Mhm.
that's really a key um, a key thing as it pertains to how the industry will go. We'll see. I might be right. I might be wrong. It's a guess
I
right
mean,
now. Speculative.
for sure. And I mean that again is kind of the point of this conversation of like it doesn't really matter what the rest of the industry is doing. It matters what's best for your business. And that's the piece that we take our time, to kind of share these types of different pieces. So
Yeah.
let's end our last couple of minutes here with some of these questions
Uh-huh.
that we'll just kind of do rapid fire. So if you see one on the side, thank you guys for asking such good questions. These are really, really important. Just as a reminder, if you drop your question in here as the recording or anything after, we always go back in and comb the question. So don't feel like you won't get an answer. You can also DM
Mhm.
us because, like we said, it doesn't really matter what, software company that you're talking about. It matters what's best for your business. We can always answer like, do you like this system, or what are some considerations with this system? But that is a big piece of it. So let's do this one. What's the best way to document current processes before considering a new system? And maybe especially if you don't have um, a very mature IT organization, to start to like lay the foundation for having one, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a scope conversation on this on what are we trying to do, right? But you should know what your current processes are, and you should have them documented. And just walk them, right? Process maps are your friends. If you don't know how to do process mapping, it's something that a lot of folks can help with, right? But
Mhm.
you start thinking about documenting your current processes. The best way to do it is to just start
Yeah.
and start working through it. You're gonna have to do it if you're gonna get a new system anyway. Knowing your processes well enough to know where you have problems and where you have strengths and where you have dependencies, your critical to qualities, those types of things are all going to come from that documentation of processes. It leads to requirements work as well. And frankly, it has nothing to do with whether or not you get a new system or you improve the old one, right? If you're going to improve the old system, you should still understand your processes.
Mhm.
You got to know them out of the way. So,
And like it does, and even if you're not talking about systems, maybe you might be talking about training. Maybe you might be talking about like workforce optimization. Maybe talking about a variety
yeah,
of different things. This is a main discipline that you need, that a lot of people are scared to ask about because there's some shame in there. Like, I don't really know what we do, and that's okay, right? And that's the biggest thing in that conversation is like, let's
yeah.
just figure it out then,
Well,
right?
nobody knows
And that's
everything about your business, right?
exactly,
So,
exactly. Exactly. So let's do what's one mistake organizations often make when evaluating legacy systems specifically?
they assume it can do less than it can. That's the biggest mistake. Like this goes back to the is it your software that's the limiting factor, or is it your structure?
Yeah.
Is this a people, a process, a technology, a policy problem? We
Mhm.
had one client back in the day that required wet signatures. Like, well, that's
Yep.
not a technology problem. I mean, why can't we use DocuSign? And like,
Mhm.
well, we require wet signatures. It's our policy. Like, well, then you're that's the people aren't the problem. The process isn't the problem. The technology, your policy is the
Yeah.
problem,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of different things in there that um, have an impact. And they got a new ERP, and then they were still requiring wet signatures, and their procurement process was still a disaster.
Yeah. And I mean, procurement, a lot of people are like, where do you see AI in the organization? I was like, procurement. A lot of times that it goes in the most boring places. No offense if you're in procurement, right? But in the places that are the most manual, that need a lot of process redesign, but that's only going to help in that technology piece if you're willing to re-engineer your processes,
Mhm.
or your policies, as you mentioned in this. So let's do one more. If you have any additional questions, definitely drop them in the comments as we wrap up here in the conversation. But I think this is a good one to kind of like jump in. How do companies avoid jumping straight to a replacement without fully understanding the root problem? We kind of talked about, layering this back, right? But I think the reason this question is interesting to me is because we've talked to a lot of people that are end users, that call us to be like, I'm nervous about this implementation because we have no idea as to what's happening, or no one's talked to us. How important is the root if that is like the frontline staff? to understanding what their experience is?
Um, and how do we avoid jumping straight to a replace without fully understanding the problem? You do your homework, right? But at the end of the day, you can't rush these things. It's going to take you 18 months to implement a new ERP. Someone's going to tell you nine, someone's going to tell you 12. Assume 18 months. And then it's going to take a little bit longer after that to actually be into it and using it effectively. So you got time.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, let's not get into a rush on this. And we got all kinds of different things where, especially younger generations, are so used to this immediate gratification. It has to be fast. It has to be quick. It has to be easy. It's none of these things,
Yeah.
right? It's not fast. It's not quick. It's not easy. It's not cheap, right? So don't screw it up by trying to
Mhm.
go too fast, especially when it's we just want this to be done and over with. That's when you're going to make mistakes. You're not checking your side view mirrors in that scenario, and you just need to get your ducks in a row. You know, that's
Yeah.
how you do it, moving too fast, jumping in too quickly before understanding what the actual problem is.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you all for joining this conversation. I think this is a really important quote unquote trend. I hate that word, right? But that we're going to start seeing is when people kind of wise up to like how much does this cost? How much does this lock into my environment? And how much am I not, utilizing a lot of what I already have in this kind of SaaS revolution or this AI revolution is such an important conversation to stay grounded. And what are your strategies? And how do I make sure I really understand all of those? So, Adam, any closing thoughts you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up today?
Yeah, I'd say that at the end of the day, the tools that you have in place are likely pretty effective and
Hmm.
are doing a good job already, right? Sometimes what you already have is the most helpful. Um, you have all these safety features in new automobiles. You want to know what the most important safety feature in your car is?
Your seatbelt.
Exactly. And that's been around for what, 70 years or something stupid like that, right? So had the seatbelts saved more lives than all of the crazy safety shit that's been added to vehicles these days. The sensors in the front that prevent rear end collisions, all of the airbags, all of this, the lane departure warnings and all of those are neat features. Some of them are annoying, right? The lane departure warning is really kind of annoying. It's kind of a stop. I'm in my lane and just leave me alone. Stop buzzing at me. But anyway, you probably can get more out of what you're doing today because you have tools that already work. All right. Don't
Hmm.
discount it. That's the most important thing. Look at how you can use them more effectively. I can start buckling my seatbelt, and that will improve my safety scenario. The same way
Hmm.
I can get better at helping my team understand the needs of the business and then providing solutions that resolve their problems. That by
Excellent.
itself, if you are not doing that, then throw out the idea of a new software system and focus on the nuts and bolts.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insight this morning. If you want to join more of our lives, I'm sorry we caught you at the end, but you can rewatch, and you can also find this on YouTube as well. We go live every Friday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern time here in the States. We also have lives at 3 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesdays and Thursdays on TikTok as well, which I bring a lot of your questions over to Adam to kind of talk about those on here as well. So definitely shoot us a DM if you need anything else or you have any other questions. We got to get back to our day jobs, but we'd love to hang out with you here more. So definitely join us next week, and I hope you have a great weekend.